Millions of fans remember Hercules, the legendary journeys, as one of the biggest TV adventures of the 1990s. But behind the swords, monsters, and heroic battles were surprising secrets that most viewers never discovered. From unexpected casting choices to strange on-set accidents and hidden connections that changed television history, this story is filled with twists that sound almost unbelievable, and some of the weirdest facts were happening far away from the cameras. Stay until the end, because the final fact shocked even longtime fans. Long before Hercules, the legendary journeys became one of the most popular adventure shows of the 1990s. Almost nobody expected it to become a television phenomenon. In fact, the story began as a simple television movie project. Producers were looking for a fresh way to bring Greek mythology to modern audiences. At the time, fantasy television was not dominating ratings the way it would later. Many networks believed audiences were more interested in crime dramas, sitcoms, and family shows. The idea seemed risky. Why would viewers watch stories about ancient gods, mythical creatures, and legendary heroes? Still, the creative team decided to take a chance. The first Hercules television movies introduced a world filled with adventure, humor, and larger-than-life battles. Unlike many older mythology adaptations, this version did not take itself too seriously. It mixed action with comedy and gave Hercules a friendly personality that audiences could connect with. Something unexpected happened. Viewers loved it. Ratings came in stronger than many industry experts predicted. Fans enjoyed the mix of exciting adventures and light-hearted storytelling. Suddenly, what was supposed to be a short project started looking like something much bigger. Behind the scenes, producers realized they had discovered a formula that worked. Instead of ending after the television movies, discussions quickly began about expanding Hercules into a full weekly series. This was not the original plan at all. Yet audience demand kept growing. The success surprised many people in Hollywood. What started as a temporary experiment was slowly turning into a major television franchise. And there was another important reason for its success. The show was filmed in New Zealand, a location that offered beautiful landscapes at a lower cost than many American productions. Mountains, forests, beaches, and open fields helped create the look of an ancient mythical world without requiring huge budgets. The decision would later prove incredibly important. Not only did Hercules become a hit, but its success opened doors for other fantasy productions filmed in New Zealand. Years later, the country would become famous for hosting some of the biggest fantasy projects ever created. But nobody knew that yet. As the series moved forward, another surprising twist appeared. The man who would become the face of Hercules almost never got the role in the first place. And what happened next changed the future of the show forever. What do you think was the biggest reason for the show's success? Its action, humor, or mythology? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Today, it is almost impossible to imagine anyone other than Kevin Sorbo playing Hercules. His strong screen presence, easygoing charm, and heroic image became a major part of the show's success. But what many fans do not know is that getting the role was far from guaranteed. Before Hercules, the legendary journeys began production. Casting directors looked at many different actors. Finding the right Hercules was not easy. The character needed to look powerful enough to battle monsters and gods, but also friendly enough for audiences to root for week after week. Many actors could handle one side of the role. Very few could handle both. Kevin Sorbo had already worked as a model and actor, but he was not yet a household name. Like many performers in Hollywood, he spent years attending auditions, facing rejection, and waiting for the opportunity that could change his life. When the Hercules project appeared, it looked promising. Still, competition was intense. The producers wanted someone who could make the legendary hero feel human. Hercules was not supposed to be a perfect warrior. He needed humor, kindness, and a personality that viewers could connect with. Sorbo's audition stood out. He brought confidence to the role, without making the character feel distant or arrogant. That balance impressed the creative team. Soon, he was selected. Yet even after getting the part, there was no guarantee the show would succeed. Television history is full of projects that looked promising but disappeared after only a few episodes. The cast and crew knew they were taking a chance on a genre that many executives considered risky. Fortunately, audiences responded immediately. Fans connected with Sorbo's version of Hercules because he felt different from many traditional heroes. He could defeat monsters one moment and joke with friends the next. This combination helped separate the series from other fantasy programs. But success brought challenges too. The demanding production schedule required long filming days, physically difficult scenes, and constant travel between locations. Sorbo often performed action-heavy sequences that required significant effort and preparation. The world saw a confident hero on screen. What many viewers never saw were the exhausting days behind the cameras. And those challenges would eventually lead to several difficult moments that few fans knew about at the time. However, another unexpected event was about to reshape television history. A side character introduced during Hercules' adventures would become so popular that she would launch her own series and completely change the future of fantasy television. If you enjoy uncovering the hidden stories behind classic TV shows and the stars who made them famous, subscribe because the next chapter reveals a surprising television accident that nobody expected. When viewers watch Hercules, the legendary journeys, many believe they were seeing a magical version of ancient Greece brought to life. Massive mountains, mysterious forests, hidden temples, and endless landscapes made the world feel enormous. But behind the scenes, things were not always what they seemed. One of the strangest facts about the series is how often production team reused the same locations. A single forest could appear as 3 completely different places in separate episodes. A hillside used for a heroic battle one week might become the home of a mythical creature the next. Most fans never noticed. The crew became experts at transforming ordinary locations into entirely new settings. By changing camera angles, moving props, and adjusting lighting, they could make the same area look completely different. This clever trick helped keep production costs under control. Another unusual secret involved the show's monsters. In the 1990s, television budgets were much smaller than what modern fantasy series enjoy today. Expensive computer effects were limited, so the production team had to become creative. Many creatures were created using costumes, makeup, masks, and practical effects. Some actors spent hours sitting in makeup chairs before filming even began. By the time cameras rolled, they looked nothing like themselves. What appeared to be a terrifying monster on screen was often a performer struggling to see through heavy makeup and costume pieces. Then there were the action scenes. Viewers often watched Hercules throw enemies across the screen with incredible force. The reality was much less magical. Careful camera positioning, hidden mats, stunt performers, and editing tricks helped create the illusion of superhuman strength. Sometimes actors would jump backward on purpose to make a hit appear stronger than it really was. The final result looked impressive, but the filming process could be surprisingly funny. Crew members often had to keep serious faces, while watching actors dressed as gods, monsters, and mythical warriors perform dramatic scenes in the middle of ordinary outdoor locations. And then there was the weather. New Zealand's beautiful landscapes helped create the show's unique look, but the weather could change quickly. A bright, sunny scene could suddenly become cloudy, forcing crews to pause production or find creative ways to maintain visual consistency. Yet despite these challenges, the show continued growing in popularity. In fact, one of the biggest surprises in television history was about to happen. A character who was only supposed to appear briefly would attract so much attention that she would eventually become even more famous than anyone expected. And that character's name was Xena. What happened next changed everything. When Hercules, the legendary journeys, introduced Xena, nobody knew they were watching the beginning of something much bigger. Xena was played by Lucy Lawless, and at first, she was not meant to become the center of a new television universe. She appeared as a dangerous warrior who crossed paths with Hercules. Her character was tough, mysterious, and clearly different from the heroes viewers were used to seeing. But audiences noticed her. Very quickly, Xena became more than just another guest character. She was complicated. She could be ruthless, but she also showed signs that she wanted to change. That made viewers curious about her past and what might happen next. The producers saw that reaction. Instead of allowing Xena's story to end, they developed a separate series around her character. Xena, Warrior Princess, premiered in 1995, the same year Hercules. The legendary journeys became a weekly series. That was an unusual television move. A character introduced in one show had effectively become strong enough to lead another, and Xena did not simply survive on the popularity of Hercules. She became a major star in her own right. The chemistry between Lucy Lawless and Renee O'Connor helped make the new series especially memorable. Xena's relationship with Gabrielle gave the show another emotional layer, balancing its action and humor with friendship, loyalty, and personal growth. Suddenly, viewers had two connected fantasy worlds to follow. But there was something even more interesting happening behind the scenes. The success of Hercules and Xena helped prove that fantasy television could attract a large mainstream audience. At a time when special effects were still limited compared with today's technology, these shows showed that strong characters and creative storytelling could sometimes matter more than expensive visuals. For Kevin Sorbo, the success was enormous. For Lucy Lawless, it created an international breakthrough. And for television producers, it opened a door. But there was a price for making so many action-heavy episodes. The actors were not simply standing in front of a camera and pretending to fight. They were working through long shooting schedules, demanding stunts, difficult costumes, weapon falls, and physically exhausting scenes. Eventually, those dangers would become impossible to ignore. The world saw Hercules as nearly invincible. Behind the cameras, however, the man playing him was discovering just how fragile even a television superhero could be. And what happened to Kevin Sorbo would become one of the most difficult chapters in the show's history. On screen, Hercules seemed almost impossible to hurt. He could fight armies, face monsters, survive impossible battles, and walk away as if nothing had happened. But Kevin Sorbo was not Hercules. The physical demands of the series were real, and over time, the long hours of filming action scenes and stunts took a serious toll. Sorbo's work in the show required more than simply looking like a powerful hero. He had to spend hours performing physically demanding scenes, often while wearing heavy costumes and working with stunt teams. The schedule could be exhausting, especially when the same scenes had to be repeated from different camera angles. But one of the biggest challenges came away from the battlefield. In the mid-1990s, while the show was at the height of its popularity, Sorbo experienced a serious health crisis. He began suffering from intense headaches and other symptoms. At first, the problem was not fully understood. Then doctors discovered that he had suffered several strokes caused by an aneurysm in an artery near his shoulder. For someone playing one of television's strongest heroes, the reality was frightening. Sorbo later spoke publicly about the experience, explaining how suddenly his health had changed. He had been working at the center of a successful television series, and now he was dealing with a condition that could affect his ability to work at all. Production of Hercules had to adjust around his recovery. This was one of those moments when the image on television and the reality of a person's life could not have been more different. Millions of viewers saw an unstoppable hero. Behind that image was an actor facing a very real struggle. Yet Sorbo eventually returned to work. His recovery became part of a much larger personal transformation, and his experience showed just how demanding the production had been. The dangers were not limited to the lead actor either. Action television required stunt performers, supporting actors, and crew members to work around weapons, horses, falls, fire effects, and complicated choreography. Even when everything was carefully planned, accidents could happen. That made the cheerful, adventurous tone of the series even more remarkable. The audience saw a world where heroes always seemed to survive. The people making that world had to deal with very real risks. And there was another side to the show's production that viewers rarely thought about. The strange collection of guest stars who passed through Hercules' world. Some were famous before appearing on the series. Others became recognizable names later. A few appearances were so unexpected that longtime fans still talk about them today. But one of the strangest connections involved an actor who would later become one of the biggest stars in Hollywood. And once you know where to look, you may never watch the show the same way again. One of the most fun things about Hercules, the legendary journeys, is looking back at the cast list years later. The show featured a long line of guest performers, and some appearances are easy to miss because the actors were hidden under costumes, makeup, or unfamiliar characters. One especially surprising name connected to the series is Bruce Campbell. Campbell became one of the most recognizable faces in the world of cult fantasy and action television, but his relationship with the Hercules universe was much bigger than a simple guest appearance. He played Autolycus, the charming and dishonest thief who often brought comedy into the show's adventures. Autolycus was completely different from Hercules. He was not the strongest person in the room. He did not have divine powers, and he certainly did not follow the rules. What he had was confidence, and somehow, he usually found a way to escape trouble. Campbell's performance became so popular that Autolycus appeared repeatedly throughout the connected Hercules and Xena television universe. That was one of the show's clever tricks. Instead of treating every episode like a completely separate story, the producers built a small television universe where characters could cross between different shows. A character from Hercules could appear in Xena. A familiar actor could return as a different character, and fans began recognizing these connections. Another fascinating part of the series was its use of performers who later became more widely known. Looking back at older television episodes can feel like opening a time capsule because actors who were not yet major stars sometimes appeared before their careers took off. But the strangest part was not always who appeared. It was how some actors were transformed. The makeup department could make a familiar performer almost impossible to recognize. A person who looked completely ordinary in real life could suddenly become an ancient warrior, a monster, a god, or a mysterious stranger. That helped the show create the feeling that its world was much larger than its budget suggested. And there was another clever trick. The same performer could sometimes appear in different roles within the wider mythology. For viewers watching casually, this might go unnoticed. For dedicated fans, it became part of the fun. The Hercules universe was full of these little details. But behind all the costumes, guest stars, and hidden connections was an even bigger production secret. The series often had to create the illusion of a massive ancient world while working with practical locations and limited television resources. That meant the crew had to reuse sets, props, costumes, and locations in ways that most viewers never noticed. And once you start looking closely, some of those tricks become surprisingly obvious. The show may have looked enormous, but the production team was constantly finding clever ways to make something small look huge. And some of the strangest examples were hiding right in front of the audience. One of the strangest things about Hercules, the legendary journeys, is how much television magic was created from ordinary things. The show looked like it had an enormous world filled with ancient cities, dangerous forests, temples, armies, and mythical creatures. But the production team did not have the massive budgets that modern fantasy shows can use. So they had to be clever, very clever. A single location could become several different places simply by changing the camera angle, dressing the background with new props, or filming during different weather and lighting conditions. To the audience, it looked like Hercules was constantly traveling across an enormous ancient world. In reality, the production often depended on a relatively small group of locations around New Zealand. This was not simply a money-saving trick. It became part of the show's visual identity. New Zealand's natural scenery gave the series something that a studio set could never fully reproduce. Mountains, forests, open fields, and rocky landscapes created a feeling of scale. But there was another secret hiding in plain sight. The show's costumes and props were often reused and modified. A costume might appear on one character in one episode, and then return later in a different form. Props could also be changed, repainted, or rearranged to create something that looked completely new. For a weekly television production, this kind of recycling was practical. The audience, however, was usually too busy watching the action to notice. Then came the weapons. Swords, staffs, shields, and other props had to look convincing without being unnecessarily dangerous. Stunt versions could be made from safer materials, while close-up shots could use props that looked more realistic. The trick was making both versions appear identical on screen. The same principle applied to fights. A punch did not need to actually hit someone to look painful. The camera could be positioned so that the movement appeared much more powerful than it really was. Sound effects added another layer of realism. A simple movement combined with the right camera angle and a dramatic sound could suddenly feel like a devastating blow. This was old-school television magic, and it worked. But perhaps the most interesting production secret was the show's ability to balance action with humor. The creators knew that audiences did not necessarily want non-stop darkness. A serious battle could be followed by a joke. A dangerous villain could suddenly become ridiculous. That tone helped Hercules stand apart from many fantasy shows. It also helped create a loyal audience. Still, every successful television series eventually reaches a point where the question becomes unavoidable. How long can the formula continue? For Hercules, the answer would eventually become complicated. The show had survived injuries, production challenges, changing television trends, and the pressure of maintaining a weekly adventure series. But its greatest legacy was already becoming clear. It had helped prove that a strange idea about mythological hero could become a global television success. And the final chapter of that story contains one last fact that explains why people still remember Hercules decades later. By the time Hercules, the legendary journeys ended in 1999, the show had become far more than a television experiment. It had created a recognizable version of Hercules for an entire generation. The series ran for 6 seasons and 111 episodes, while its success helped support the connected Xena, warrior princess universe. What began with a few television movies had grown into one of the most memorable fantasy franchises of the 1990s. But perhaps the weirdest fact of all is that Hercules became successful without looking like the expensive fantasy productions audiences see today. There were no modern computer-generated worlds covering every background. There were no giant movie budgets. Instead, the series relied on New Zealand's natural scenery, practical effects, costumes, makeup, stunt work, clever camera angles, and a cast that understood exactly what kind of show they were making. That combination worked, and it helped influence the way fantasy could be presented on television. The show's popularity also changed the careers of several people involved. Kevin Sorbo became internationally recognized as Hercules. Lucy Lawless became strongly associated with Xena. Bruce Campbell's Autolycus became a fan favorite. And the wider production team gained valuable experience creating a fantasy universe week after week. But there was something deeper about the show's appeal. Hercules was powerful, but he was not perfect. He made mistakes. He lost people. He faced failure. And instead of simply being a character who defeated every enemy, he was often presented as someone trying to do the right thing in a world that was rarely simple. That emotional side helped the series survive beyond its original era. Many shows from the 1990s are remembered mainly because of nostalgia. Hercules is remembered because it created a world people wanted to return to. And now comes the final fact. The show's connection to Xena was not just a clever crossover idea. It became one of the most successful examples of a television spin-off, growing into a major franchise of its own. Xena eventually developed her own identity, her own fan base, and her own place in television history. That means Hercules did something unusual. It did not simply create a hit show. It helped create another hit show. And that may be the strangest part of the entire story. A project built around an ancient myth became a modern television universe, launched major careers, introduced characters who became cultural icons, and helped prove that fantasy did not need a massive Hollywood budget to capture millions of viewers. So when you look back at Hercules, the legendary journeys, the costumes and monsters are only part of the story. The real surprise is how much television history was hiding underneath them. Many people remember Hercules as the strong man with the sword. But behind that character was a risky idea, an unexpected casting success, a production full of clever tricks, a spin-off that became a phenomenon, and a group of creators who turned limitations into part of the show's charm. And perhaps that is why, decades later, fans are still discovering strange little facts about a series that was never supposed to become this big. If you have ever felt like your own biggest struggles made you stronger, remember that even the most unlikely journeys can lead somewhere unexpected. And if you enjoy discovering the hidden stories behind classic television, keep watching, because the next forgotten Hollywood story may reveal an even stranger side, a show you thought you already knew. One reason Hercules, the legendary journey, still feels different from many fantasy shows is its unusual mix of adventure, comedy, mythology, and friendship. The series could move from a serious battle to a funny moment within seconds. That balance was not accidental. The creators understood that Hercules did not have to be a dark, serious hero all the time. Kevin Sorbo's personality helped make that approach work. His Hercules could be powerful without constantly acting tough. He could laugh, make mistakes, and care deeply about ordinary people. That made the character easier for viewers to connect with. The mythology was also intentionally flexible. The show borrowed names and ideas from Greek mythology, but freely changed stories, characters, and timelines to create its own fictional universe. It was not trying to be a history lesson. That freedom allowed the writers to create unexpected stories. Gods could become enemies. Heroes could become villains. Monsters could sometimes become sympathetic characters. And ordinary people could become the most important part of an episode. This was one of the show's biggest strengths. It made the audience wonder what might happen next. But there was another reason the series worked so well. The show did not depend completely on Hercules. Characters like Iolaus, Salmoneus, Autolycus, and others gave the world different personalities. Their relationships created humor and emotional moments that made the series feel bigger than one hero. That is something many successful television shows understand. A great lead character can attract viewers, but memorable supporting characters make them stay. And Hercules had plenty of them. Television has changed dramatically since 1995. Special effects have become more advanced. Streaming has changed how shows are produced and watched. Fantasy series can now spend enormous amounts of money, creating worlds that look almost completely real. So, why do people still talk about Hercules? Part of the answer is nostalgia. For many viewers, the series was part of growing up. They remember watching Hercules fight monsters, meeting strange gods, and getting pulled into another impossible adventure. But nostalgia alone does not explain everything. The show had a very clear personality. You knew what kind of experience you were going to get. There would be action, there would be humor, there would be mythology, and there would usually be a lesson about courage, friendship, or doing the right thing. That consistency made the series comfortable to return to. The show also arrived at the right moment. In the 1990s, television fantasy was still finding its identity. Hercules and Xena showed that audiences were willing to follow fantasy characters every week, not just in movies. That helped open the door for future fantasy television. Of course, modern viewers may notice things that audiences in 1995 did not. Some effects look dated. Some costumes look unusual. Some stories are intentionally over the top. But those imperfections are now part of the show's charm. The series does not try to compete with modern visual effects. It represents a different era of television, and sometimes that makes it more enjoyable. Many fans do not return to Hercules because it looks perfect. They return because it feels familiar, and that may be the strongest legacy any television show can have. Perhaps the strangest lesson from Hercules, the legendary journeys, is that nobody could have predicted how far the original idea would travel. A character from ancient mythology became the center of a successful television series. That series helped create a spin-off. The spin-off became a major hit. Actors who were not household names became internationally recognized. And a small collection of television movies eventually turned into a connected fantasy universe. That is a remarkable journey. But there is another important lesson hidden inside it. The show succeeded partly because it understood its limitations. It did not have the budget of a major Hollywood movie. It could not create every monster digitally. It could not build an entirely new ancient city for every episode. So the creators used what they had. They found beautiful locations. They reused sets. They relied on costumes and makeup. They worked with stunt performers. They used camera tricks. And most importantly, they focused on characters. That approach allowed the series to survive limitations that might have destroyed another production. For viewers, the result was something unusual. It felt big without actually needing to be enormous. And perhaps that is why Hercules still has a place in television history. The show was never perfect. It was sometimes strange, sometimes funny, sometimes dramatic, and sometimes completely ridiculous. But it had personality. Decades later, that personality is still what fans remember. Many television shows disappear when their final episode ends. Hercules did something different. It became a memory. And for a series that began as a risky experiment,